Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to a live stream. We are going to be talking about Varys and we are going to be talking about Littlefinger. So a special welcome to you if you're watching live. Great to see you. I can see there's a lot of you already down there in the chat room, and also welcome if you're watching this on catch up. It's great to see you. So what we're going to do, as usual, is that I've got some stuff that I've prepared about both Varys and Littlefinger that I will go through just by way of background. But this is mostly going to be a Q&A session. I've got some questions that I've already got from my patrons. As always, my patrons get priority when coming up with questions. Of course, if there are some super chats, we'll get to the super chats straight away. But please just shoot the questions down there in the chat room and we'll get to them as soon as we can. Why don't we start off just by just saying hi to a few people. I can see there's a lot of people there already. Hi, it's great to see you all. Who have we got there? Kingslayer Wifey, G's Name Taken, Miss Mackenzie, AU Packmule. Hey, great to see you. Cecily Cogsworth. Says Kyle sent us. I know Kyle is live streaming at the same time, so that's great. Do feel free to stick over on the end of his before coming over here. Kyle's a good friend of mine. I don't want to steal any of his views, but that's great to see. Oh, Kyle's there in the chat. Great to see you as well. I guess that means that your chat has finished. Great to see you, Kyle. Great. And who else is here? Lots of people. Emilio, Rough Girl, Desiree, Sunny Cloud, lots of people coming out there. Fantastic. And it's great that you've come over here after Kyle's live stream is finished. Okay, so for those who've just arrived, we're going to look at two, I have to say, my favorite characters being Varys and Littlefinger. I think that they deserve to be looked at together because they are, although they're very different characters, there's a certain approach that they both have, this sort of politicking, conniving, playing behind the scenes kind of approach that we see from both of them. So I thought what we'd do is we'll start off the first half of this live stream. Let's look at Varys. And then the second half, we'll look at Littlefinger. As I say, we'll come to any super chats straight away. I've got a few questions that I've got up my sleeve, but just to kick us off with Varys, I thought if we just do a little bit of background so we're all on the same page. Some show people may not be as up to speed about all the background that we get in the books about Varys. So let me just take a quick swig of water and then we'll get in. So Varys is very different to the other nobles in King's Landing at the start of the show, start of the books, because he wasn't born as part of the ruling class. All the others were, even Littlefinger, who we'll come on to later. He came from a small house, but he was a member of the ruling classes. Varys is very different. He started off right at the very bottom. He was born over in Essos, in a city called Lys that we don't actually see really on the show. And then after a while, as a child, being taken around, really as a street child, he was joined a traveling theatre troupe, a group of mummers, as they were called. And then he ended up, the bit where the show picks up on is this idea that he got sold off to a magician, to a sorcerer, who mutilated him, threw his parts into a fire, and used that as part of some magical act in order to speak to somebody in the flames or to hear a voice from the flames. After that, Varys got chucked out on the streets and he had to make his own living. So Varys, from that point on, he ends up being a thief, but gets sort of pushed out of Lys and ends up in a Pentos. Now, in Pentos is where he really made his name, because in Pentos, what he did was he came up with a really cunning plan. He wasn't just going to be a thief. He knew all the other thieves in the area, and he knew when they'd stolen stuff. And so what he did was he made an agreement with a young sellsword who was Illyrio, who we saw in the show. That was who Dany and Viserys were staying with at the very beginning in episode 1 of Game of Thrones. So when they were both younger, he set up this little business with them. So when Varys found that one of his fellow thieves had stolen something from one of the rich folk of Pentos, he would steal it from that thief, give it to Illyrio, and Illyrio would then go and sell it back to the person it got stolen from in the first place. And very soon it became known to the wealthy people in Pentos that if they ever got anything stolen, they had to find Illyrio, and Illyrio would, through Varys, get it back for them for a small fee. This made them some money. They then realized that the thing which actually made them even more money was information. People would pay a lot more money for getting information, and in particular for getting bits of information back from people, stuff that had been stolen, like letters and things like that. So that's where Varys got into building up this network of little birds, or over in Pentos he called them, I think, his little mice. And he built a reputation there as being this kind of person who knew what was going on, who had this web out across the city. And that is when he got the attention of Aerys II, who we know as the Mad King. And he was starting to get a bit paranoid at the time. And what he really wanted was somebody who he could trust to know what was going on in the world. And he'd heard about Varys, and so he brought Varys over to be his Master of Whisperers. So that is how Varys got to be in the position he was in. Not because he was some kind of noble lord, as all the other members of the small council were, but because he was recruited purely on the basis of his skills and the network that he had built up. So that's how he got there. He survived Robert's rebellion. He was forgiven, as it were, by Robert and by Tywin Lannister, and obviously then he served Robert Baratheon and then moved on into the Lannisters afterwards. There's a little bit of a sort of a break between the books and the show about what happens, but the rough story remains the same in that he frees Tyrion and realizes that this is going to be a problem with Cersei, and so he also flees his position in King's Landing. And in the books, he comes out in support of Aegon, or Fagon, as some of us know him, and on the show, he obviously ends up with Daenerys. So there's a little bit of a distinction there that I will happily talk about if you're interested in just a moment. But that's where we are in terms of the character. Now, in terms of who he is, and then after this, I'll come in and get to some of the questions. In terms of who he is and as a person and what he wants, that is slightly mysterious still. What we know in the books is that he does seem to be committed to getting his candidate onto the throne. But what we get from both the books and the show is this idea that he wants order. He wants peace for the realm, and he does not like the little people, the non-lords, to be suffering. He sees the great game that's been going on, this Game of Thrones, and he's the person who comes out and say, why is it when all you lords are playing your game, why is it the people who suffer are the small folk? He is the person who is on their side. And that is actually only to be expected, because he is the lord out of all of the lords who understands what it is to be a member of the downtrodden underclass of Westeros, or Essos in his case. So there is this kind of, I wouldn't say altruistic side, but it's a side that we see in a lot of characters where they think that they are serving some greater good in some way. And as a result, in order to serve that greater good, they are willing to do bad things. They are willing to do things that others might question or think are evil or wrong in order to achieve the thing that they think is important. We see this, the prime example is Melisandre, who is absolutely convinced that she is right, that she is serving humanity, that she is doing good things, and she is willing to do bad things in order to achieve that greater good. I've got a video on the way about Bloodraven, and he's exactly the same. And we see a little bit about that in Varys. So that's the sort of the introduction to Varys. So hopefully we're all on the same page there. I've got a couple of questions that have come in from my patrons and from Twitter. They're largely focused on his death. But if you've got any other questions about Varys, do just sort of quickly throw them in there. I did see, incidentally, Emilio, you sent a super chat through just at the very beginning. Thank you very much for that. I've really appreciated. Saying the show has to end with a woman and Varys in a tavern in the Reach, nodding to each other, and the credits appear. The mockingbird arises. I mean, I like that. That's great. It's I don't think that's how it'll end, but I love the idea that you get these great political survivors who people might write off, but they're going to come through. So that's really that's what how they view themselves. Varys has another quote about all the big fish eating each other, and he just keeps on paddling. That's how he views himself as a survivor, while the others are just going about doing their thing. Okay, so let's just have a quick flick through some of these questions. Will Varys betray Daenerys? Asks Kerry McDonald. How will he do it? And hi. Okay, so will Varys betray Daenerys? I think this comes down to, and I think there's probably going to be a few questions along this line, and this also comes into the difference between the show and the book. So this is very much a show question. And so I'll answer it with a show answer. But then I think if we get onto what's happening in the books, because I think that they will probably, like many things on the show, they will end up in roughly the same place. I think Varys will betray Dany? Probably is my answer. I think he probably will, and the reason why is that on the show he's very much put across as this character who cares about the little people, and he cares about how the world is governed, and he wants to make sure it's done in the right way. And that is the kind of the pitch, if you like, that he puts to Daenerys, implicitly saying, you know what, if you are veering away from this, then you're not the person I want on the throne. And that obviously is something that Dany takes to heart, and she says to him, you promise me that if you ever think that that's what I'm doing, that I'm not actually serving the people of this realm, you tell me to my face. You don't go behind my back. And he promises her, and she in turn promises him that if he betrays her, then she will burn him with dragonfire. So I think this is clearly teeing up, and the showrunners love a little bit of quite heavy-handed foreshadowing. So I think this is teeing up the idea that Varys is open to the possibility of betraying Daenerys, of telling her to her face that she's not doing what she should be doing, and then betraying her. What might she possibly do that is, or consider doing, that is against what Varys might think is a good thing? She has on many occasions she has threatened to effectively firebomb cities. She has threatened to wipe out innocent civilians simply in order to get the throne. She's threatened this on 2, 3, maybe even 4 occasions on the show. So it's not just a hollow thing. This is something that she's actively considered doing and had to be persuaded out of. If she goes anywhere near that again, I could see Varys being quite concerned. And I could see fundamentally, if he realizes that not only is there an alternative monarch, Jon, but there is an alternative monarch who has a better claim than Daenerys, then he might well decide that he wants to throw his lot in behind him. Now, he would not see that as a betrayal. He would see that as being, I am going to support the rightful king, and the rightful king is actually going to be better for the realm. Incidentally, I think Tyrion will probably also face, if information about Jon's parentage comes out, will also face this this kind of question of loyalty, because he has seen firsthand the character of both of them, and I think we know which one of those two seems to be more in line with where Tyrion's thinking is. So if he does that, I could well see Daenerys going through with her promise or threat and killing Varys with fire. So I think that is not incredibly likely, but that is probably the most likely outcome for Varys. Incidentally, I don't think I see him surviving. And the reason why I don't think I see him surviving is actually nothing to do with Melisandre saying, you know, we've both got to die on this continent. Melisandre says huge amounts of things that are not true. I don't think we need to pay much attention to that. I think the reason why he's going to die is that if you look back at the old order of things, every single head of household at the beginning of Game of Thrones is now dead. Every single member of the small council at the beginning of Game of Thrones is now dead, except for Varys. And I cannot see that Varys is going to be the one character who survives. I think that we're going to have a completely new start in terms of the rulers of Westeros. So I think the only remaining person who has to die in order for that to happen is Varys. So that was quite a long-winded response, but hopefully that's picked up a few of the other questions we've got going on here. Okay, let's have a look through more. Emilio says, to be fair, Aegon would be a way better ruler than 90% of the characters. I would actually agree with that. Token Joe asks, do you think we'll see Illyrio again on the show? I think probably not. In the books, yes, I think we will. Which brings me to the second half of this sort of equation. Although, just quickly, Amber Lynn, thank you for your time and hard work. Happy Sunday. Thank you for your super chat. That's really kind. Thank you so much. $14.99. They couldn't select $15. I will take $14.99. That's incredibly generous. Thank you so much. On the book version of Varys, which is connected to Illyrio, and much more strongly connected to Illyrio, we get the whole backstory that what happened with Varys was that he said that he switched the babies, the heirs to the throne, the older siblings of Jon Snow, in effect, Rhaegar's other children, or he switched one of them, Aegon, the eldest son, and then raised him to be this perfect, idealized prince who will be able to rule the Westeros wisely. So that's what he said. And in the books, he produces this person who is in disguise but claims to be Aegon. Now, people call him Phaegon because a lot of people, myself included, don't believe he actually is Aegon. What I think has been going on, I think there are a lot of hints to this all the way through, is that actually this is an offshoot of the Targaryen family, the Blackfires. And I'm not going to go into all of the history on the Blackfires. I'm sure a lot of you know it already. But basically, they are an offshoot. The Blackfire rebellions were this other branch of the Targaryens trying to gain control. And each time they were beaten back, the Golden Company over in Essos emerged from the exiles, the Blackfire supporter exiles over in Essos. And so it appears that Varys and Illyrio have got a plot to put this heir to the Blackfires, who may also be a Targaryen from the other line as well. It's not clear, but to put this heir onto the throne, onto the Iron Throne. And they want to do this ideally by marrying them to Daenerys and then launching an invasion and bring it across. Now, that character, that Aegon or Phaegon character, is not on the show. So that whole plot line has been taken out, which is why we've got Varys linking up with Daenerys, not with Aegon, because they had to put him somewhere, basically. But I think that his end is going to be the same, because I think Aegon's end will come with Daenerys burning him with fire. I think that is what's going to happen to him. And I think that because he can't bond with the dragons, and will get burned with fire, and she will prove that he's a Targaryen pretender. He's not a real Targaryen, as it were. So I think that's what's going to happen with that. Pegleg Pete, one of my patrons, put up a question around this, saying, please make some comments on how powerful his king's blood was when the would-be sorcerer dismembered him, and his probable lineage. Blackfire ? And so this is coming from the idea that the reason why Varys is supporting this is not out of just some pure idealized view of wanting to have a great monarch. He does want that, but also because he is part of this lineage. And so the argument goes is that the reason why he was used and he was dismembered and used as part of this blood magic was because he had king's blood within him, and that was why it was used. Now, personally, I can certainly see the fact that he may have some Blackfire blood in him, but I have to admit, I don't think that necessarily is why the sorcerer chose him. I think the sorcerer just used a person, somebody off the streets, without necessarily knowing Varys's heritage. We get caught up a lot on talking about king's blood being powerful. King's blood is powerful, but that doesn't mean that it's the only kind of blood which it has power. It's just that that's the kind of blood which has the most power. So that's why people are hunting for it. Blood sacrifices are used all over the place. This is one of the foundations of not just Targaryen magic, but Valyrian magic as a whole, fire and blood. Blood is also very much part of the weirwood, source of the weirwood network magic, as it were. So blood in and of itself and sacrifice is a fundamental part of all magic. It's only that king's blood has, or royal lines have, greater power than the rest. So I hope, Peter, I don't know whether you're out there in the chat or just watching this on catch-up, but I hope that answers that question. I think that he may have Blackfire blood in him. That certainly explains why he is brought on into this plot. But I don't think that the sorcerer necessarily knew that when he took him and used him. Okay, let's go and have a look at a few more questions here. Bobo Kingo says fire and blood equals Valyrian magic and first man magic. Yeah, that is right. Or the fire bit, not necessarily for the first man magic. I have to say, they use a lot more sort of natural elements. They don't like fire. Actually, if you think about it, fire was what would burned down all the weirwoods, and so they're not a big fan of that. But blood, absolutely. Sacrifice is one of the things that goes across the piece in terms of what makes magic work. Desiree Lafleur says, I'm not convinced that Varys hates magic. I think it's telling that Arya thinks he is a wizard or magician based on his attire and conversation with Illyrio. Ned dismissed her when he shouldn't have. I think so. I think Varys probably does. I think that one of the things that with him knowing stuff, with him being a master of whisperers, is that there are rumors that he must have some magic in order to know this. This is the kind of thing that George R.R. Martin does a lot in his writing, is that you see one character and something said about one character which is said about a similar character back in the history. And Bloodraven, who I'll probably reference a few times because I'm doing a lot of reading about Bloodraven at the moment, he was a master of whisperers effectively when he was Hand of the King, and people said that he must be a magician. In that case, it was probably true, but they said that he must be a magician because he knew so much about what was going on. And the same thing goes for Varys. People say he must be a magician because he knows so much. And that, I think, for Varys, it is simply that he's got a really good network of spies. Does he hate magic? I can believe probably he does. I could certainly see that he's got a fear of magic. I would, if my earliest experience of it was what his earliest experience of it is, and I don't think he's had any positive experiences of magic. So I think I would say fear is probably the wrong word, but I think he's wary of magic, certainly. Okay, let's have a quick flick through. Kerry McDonald super chat saying, "Wish I could send you more. You're awesome." Thank you. That's really kind. Thank you, Kerry. That's really nice. Who else have we got going on then? Bobo Kingos. I mean that fire is for Valyrian magic and blood for First Men magic. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's a useful clarification. Thank you. Leslie M. Isaacs says, the way Kinvara says, "Shall I tell you what the voice said?" That was odd to me because, of course, Varys knows what the voice said. So was she just taunting him? Yes, I think she was just taunting him. She was trying. So the scene, for those who don't remember, was in season 6, I think, when Kinvara, who was on the show the High Priestess of the Lord of Light, is summoned to Tyrion and Varys, and Varys shows his disdain for all magic users and religions and things like that. And then she just does this kind of weird thing where she says to him, "I know about your past, I know what happened to you, and I know what the voice in the flames said." Now, she said that knowing that he knew what the voice in the flames said, and it was just to unnerve him and to show off her powers, that she would also know it, because the working assumption is that Varys has told no one what the voice in the flames said. So the only way that she would know is if she has some kind of magic or power herself. So that was what was going on there, I think. Incidentally, I don't think that we need to assume that this means that the voice in the flames was the Lord of Light. I don't think that we need to assume that she even knows what the voice in the flames said, simply that she knows that happened, and she could judge that Varys wouldn't take her up on it. We can't, as with all of these characters, we can't assume that when they say something, they know the absolute truth of something. They just know their side of the story, and they're going to put their side of the story. And when it comes to the priests of the Lord of Light, they have got very, very focused one eye, and they will follow that all the way. Yes, she may well know what the voice in the flames said, but I don't think we have to assume that she does know exactly. She might not. Clint Williams says, if she knows, does it mean it's the Lord of Light? Well, not necessarily, because I think that there are lots of examples where one person is doing some sort of magic and somebody else kind of sees in on it. For example, Bran, we saw him when he was doing his magic and going and having a look around at the army of the dead, and then suddenly you get the Night King grabbing him by the arm. The Night King saw what he was doing and effectively jumped into that. Similarly, we got in the Flames in season 7 when we saw Thoros conjured a vision in the flames and then got Sandor to come and have a look at it. He was inviting someone else to come in and see something. So it's clear that that you can sort of jump in and see something else that's going on. It doesn't necessarily just mean it's you talking on a sort of an encrypted telephone line to somebody. Others can listen in. I'm sure there's a slightly better example or illustration of that than that, but that's the idea. Other people can listen into what you're doing if you're doing this kind of flames magic. Lots of questions about the flames. Celt for life or Celt for life. Could Bran have spoken through the flames to Varys? It's possible, but we've not seen him do anything to do with the flames yet. We've seen him do when he's communicating to people, it has always been through a weirwood, or when Bloodraven does it, it seems to be through, he seems to be able to do it through sort of the breeze through the trees, or perhaps a babbling brook or something like that. So it's very much a kind of a natural thing rather than fire, which, as I said, does not appear to be an old magic staple. They seem to use nature, they seem to use land, trees, water, things like that, but not the destructive force of things like fire. So could have been, but I don't think it was. I don't think it was Bran. Okay, let's have a flick through there. Any more questions? Okay, so Lala42, apologies, I'm kind of picking out a few questions just at random here, guys, because there's so many good questions coming up. Apologies if I'm not getting to yours. As I say, I'm prioritizing where I can see them from my patrons and super chats, but if I see good questions here, I'm trying to get to them all. Lala42, do you think that Varys will prove his worth to Daenerys by regaining use of his little birds to make a deal with the Golden Company to betray Cersei and back Dany and Jon instead? That's a good bit of politicking there. I think that would be a good use of Varys's time. My guess is probably that as we've got quite a short season, we've only got a few more episodes to go. I think probably we're going to see that the Golden Company is not going to be as rich in history and as sort of have a sort of in-depth character as we might hope or want. As a result, I think they are largely going to be used as an army for Cersei. Now, that I don't think that means necessarily that they won't turn on her, but I don't think that Dany's focus, certainly for the first 3 or 4 episodes, is going to be on what's happening down south. I think that the pressing concern is going to be what's happening up north. It's only after they've started to face the might of the Night King's army that they will suddenly realize that they're being double-crossed down south. But she has to, I think, prioritize what's happening up north rather than what's going on down south. So yes, Varys could perhaps do that. My guess is that perhaps his little birds across the world probably do still support him. I don't think that it's quite as clear cut as he went away and completely left his spy network to whoever to pick up, or to Qyburn in this case. But I think that quite a few of his spies probably came with him, or otherwise, what has he got to offer other than his experience? I think that what he has to offer and give is his spy network. That I think the only bits of spy network that he will probably have abandoned are those bits that he had direct contact with in King's Landing. So I think that's a really good idea, and I think it's exactly the kind of thing that perhaps they should be doing, but I'm not entirely sure that's what they will be going on about. Okay, so we've got a few questions coming up about Littlefinger, so we'll get onto Littlefinger in just one moment. Let me just see whether I've got some more. Misty306 asked, how will Varys die? I think we've answered that one already. And I've already covered Pegleg Pete's question. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a quick pause here on Varys. If you've got any other burning questions on Varys, pop them in there now. In a moment, we'll come to Littlefinger, but I wanted just to take a quick pause and let you know a few things that are just coming up. First of all, for my patrons over on Patreon, thank you. I say it every time, but I mean it every time. I honestly could not keep doing this without your support, so thank you so much. There are 2 things I would just want to point out for my patrons. Firstly, as you know, I do audio narrations from the pre-release chapters from the Winds of Winter, and I do one of them a month. We've worked through quite a few of them so far, and the next one is coming up probably in about a week's time, and it's going to be Tyrion, who in the books remains my favorite character, so I'm really looking forward to it. So keep an eye out for that. In about a week's time, it's going to be the Tyrion chapter from the Winds of Winter. And the second thing for my patrons is for my $10 patrons, I give as a way to thank them, I give my $10 patrons a chance every couple of months or so to vote on what videos I should be making. I give them a choice of a few video topics that I've been considering doing, and allow my patrons to decide one of the videos that I'm doing. So I'm going to put out another one of those polls this week. I've got 3 video topics that I've been meaning to do and never really got around to. Last time I did this, my patrons came out with some really good ones. That's where the Kyburn video came from, in case you saw that one, and also the 3 tinfoil theories that I actually like. That was another one that my patrons picked. So I've got a lot of confidence that they're going to be picking some good topics. So that's for my patrons. If you're interested at all, incidentally, in supporting me on Patreon, it would be great to have you as part of that community. I prioritize what I do for my patrons, and I'm providing material as much as I possibly can. I try and do stuff most days, and I prioritize talking to them and engaging with them and trying to get hold of their direction about where they're wanting the channel to be going. So if you're interested in that, there's a link down in the description, and it's patreon.com/IndieGeek. But for my subscribers, what's coming up on the channel, and for everyone, in fact, what's coming up on the channel, 2 things. Westworld is coming up very soon, only 2 or 3 weeks time, 22nd of April, 22nd of this month, and I'm going to be ramping up my Westworld content. I will be doing weekly Westworld live streams like this, going over each episode in turn, and I'll be doing episode breakdowns, episode explains for each episode, and probably at least one other video on whatever topics come out of that episode. So I'm going to be doing that as we go into the season. But I am not going to be dropping, this is the second point, I'm not going to be dropping my Game of Thrones content. I'm going to keep on doing the Traveler's Guide. There's going to be a new Traveler's Guide every Friday all the way through, probably until the end of the year. There's a lot to cover. And I'm going to carry on doing live streams and my theory videos as much as I possibly can. So that's a quick update on what's going on. I hope you like that. Do let me know in the chat, or send me an email or something if there's anything that you're interested there, just want to chat about a little bit more. But as promised, we'll get on to Littlefinger in just 1 second. Let's just have another quick look in the chat. There's quite a bit of love for Westworld, which is excellent. Who's good? What's going on here? Some chats that have been going on. What do you think? I think I'll end the Varys one with one from Leslie Isaacs. Although incidentally, I just want to say there's a lot of my patrons out there. Just quickly flicking through there. Stephanie Peer, I can see you in there. Emilio. Who else have we got? Catherine's in there. Lots of my patrons, which is fantastic. It's fantastic. Kerry McDonald, graphics by Kathy. Lots of you are in there, so that's great. It's lovely to see you. It's lovely to see you here. The question is, what are Varys's true motives? And I think this is a good way to wrap up on Varys, because I think we've sort of come at it from a few different angles. I think he has got slightly different motives in the books and on the show. In the books, I think his motive is to get the candidate that he wants onto the throne, because he enjoys the role that he has as Master of Whisperers, and he wants to get the person he thinks is going to be the best ruler onto the throne. That might well be partly because of a familial loyalty to the Blackfires. That seems to be the most logical reason why he wanted that particular candidate. But also, at a slightly more fundamental level, he wanted to be able to train someone to be king. He's come in and had kings just sort of take the throne, and then he's got to work with them or around them or sometimes against them. If he could mold a king, if he could train a king, make that king exactly what he wanted them to be, then that I think he would like the most. And the reason why, as the sort of the next level down, is because he thinks he knows how to run the kingdom for the best. He cares about the little people as he sees them. And sorry, I just saw Kerry McDonald. You need a calendar to keep up with you. I need a calendar, Kerry. I get lost sometimes. But he cares about how the realm is run, and he thinks he knows for the best how it should be run. That, I think, is what has been carried over into the show. I think he feels he does a few little speeches about order and wanting what's best for the kingdom. And I think he feels that he knows better than all of these noble lords what is best for the kingdom. And as a result, he is going to back whichever horse or whichever candidate for the throne that he thinks is going to be the best for the kingdom. And I think this is why he was happy to get rid of King Aerys. I think that this is why, although he stuck with Robert Baratheon for a while, because he could get on with doing stuff while Robert just did whatever he did, because Robert Baratheon didn't care about how the kingdom was run. He wasn't a big fan, who was, of Joffrey. But if he gets a chance to pick someone, then he's going to try and pick someone that he thinks will do a good job. So, as with many characters in Game of Thrones, he thinks he knows best. He thinks he cares about the people better than everyone else, and he thinks that he knows how to deliver it better than everyone else. So, let's get on to Littlefinger. GWH, I think Pod is a secret Targaryen. Pod for king. Yeah, Pod for king. Can't beat that one. Great comment. Okay, so Littlefinger, I think what we'll do again, as we did last time, is if I do and hi, Justin Thomas. I saw Justin Thomas just appeared in there, just saying hi. Good to see you. I was talking about Westworld. Slight digression here. Justin Thomas is the go-to man for the Westworld Amino. If you're into aminos, he's the guy who runs the Westworld Amino, and he and I will be doing quite a lot of shared content as we come into the Westworld season. Do quite a few shared live streams over on his channel, The Justin Thomas Show, and on mine. So do go and check out his channel. But on Littlefinger, what we'll do is we'll do the same sort of thing as we did on Varys. I'll give a little bit of background, give you a chance to start chatting about him, and then we'll come to some questions. I've got a couple of questions again for my patrons. Again, if there's any super chats, we'll come to them straight away. Otherwise, I'll pick up on a few of the other comments that we've got going on there, and we'll take it from there. Okay. My tea has now gone cold, so I shall switch to some water. Littlefinger. Littlefinger, I think a lot of us know the sort of the general background, but he comes from a very young noble family, and it's one of the lowest noble families of all. It's only a couple of generations it's been a noble family, and it's so obscure that he doesn't really ever talk about where it is exactly. We know it's on one of the fingers. We know it's on the smallest of the fingers, the fingers being a little bit of Westeros that sort of goes out a bit like that, that makes it looks a bit like fingers. And we know that the family home is not some grand castle, but just a tower. And quite a small tower at that. And so he's quite disdainful of his home and his background. They are, so House Baelish, they originally came from a sellsword who came from Braavos a couple of generations ago. So the House Sigil is actually the Titan of Braavos, although Littlefinger disliked his family history so much that he changed that. He effectively created a new family emblem or crest for himself, being the mockingbird, the mockingjay. So he and he was fostered over in Riverrun. This was quite a coup for his family. His father managed to get him to go to one of the great noble houses of the kingdom, the Tullys in Riverrun, and he was fostered and he grew up with three of the characters that we know. Catelyn Tully, who obviously became Catelyn Stark, married to Ned Stark. Lysa Tully, who we knew as Lysa Arryn, the slightly weird woman up there in the Eyrie, and the younger brother, whose name completely escapes me, but you all know who I mean, who ends up, is a little bit wimpish and ends up in jail from the Lannisters, and so Edmure, that's it. So he grew up with them, and he aspired to great things, but he was, even at that age, he was quite a small child, and he was picked on a lot. Edmure came up with the nickname Littlefinger, partly because he came from the smallest of the fingers, and because he was quite small, and it's quite a derogatory term, to be honest. He, during this time, fell absolutely crazy in love with Catelyn, and Lysa fell absolutely crazy in love with him, which led to this kind of weird love sort of triangle, because Catelyn, first of all, was engaged to be married to Brandon Stark, Ned Stark's big brother, and Littlefinger got so upset by that he challenged him to a duel, completely made a mess of that, embarrassed himself, and got sent back and away. But that didn't take away the fact that he still held up throughout, and this is crucial to what he has been wanting throughout his life. He's held this flame for Catelyn Tully, or Catelyn Stark, and then Lysa Arryn held a flame for him all this time, even though she was then married off to Jon Arryn, who was the liege lord over in the Vale. So, having gone back to his father's home, he eventually manages to get himself a position in court and uses his skills, because he is undoubtedly clever, he's undoubtedly good with money, he's undoubtedly a good social climber. He used his skills to work his way up to becoming Master of Coin, which is effectively the treasurer. And whilst holding this post, he, as all good/bad treasurers do, seem to magically get very rich out of it. At the same time, the crown actually got quite poor out of it and took on huge amounts of debt with the Iron Bank of Braavos. Now, he saw this as an opportunity to do a little bit more social climbing. He was the person who conspired with Lysa Arryn to kill Jon Arryn. That was him. The spark for that was that Jon Arryn wanted to get his son over to be fostered with Tywin Lannister. And Lysa Arryn didn't want that. She wanted to keep her son. We saw how close she was to her son. She wanted to keep her son close to her, and said to Littlefinger, "Do something." And so he killed Jon Arryn, so that didn't have to happen. And then Lysa went back off to the Eyrie, to the family home, and Littlefinger got her to tell the Starks that the people who did it were the Lannisters, because, as we all know, he wants chaos, because he thinks that he is quick-minded enough to make use of chaos, to use this, as he says, as a ladder for him to climb up. And sure enough, he does use this as a ladder when he creates all of these this tension between the Starks and the Lannisters. This leads to war, and then he does deals with the Tyrells to come in league with the Lannisters, and that gets him to be called the Lord of Harrenhal. So he actually suddenly no longer just the Lord of a teeny tiny little tower, but he's Lord of, it's ruined, but the largest and most impressive castle in the center of Westeros. And from there, he goes up to the Eyrie, and as we've seen, he continues his social climbing. His plan appears to be that he will marry Lysa Arryn, and then become Lord Protector. So he is then not only the Lord of the largest part in the Riverlands, the most impressive, powerful part in the Riverlands, but also in charge, effective charge of all of the the veil, and if he can eventually marry Sansa, then he can take control of the north as well. And before you know it, he's suddenly got 3 of the 7 kingdoms all on his side, and he's turned himself from being an incredibly minor lord to probably the most important and powerful lord there is in the 7 kingdoms beside the ruler. And obviously the next step would to become ruler himself, to sit on the Iron Throne. So that is his broad plan. In terms of his main character and drivers, and thank you, I can see all these great questions coming through. We'll get to them in just one moment. In terms of his great drivers, I think he was actually open on the show with us about his 2 main drivers. The first main driver is for Sansa. Now, Sansa, this is a bit weird. So let's not think about this love for Catelyn Tully that goes. Catelyn dies. As Sansa grows, he sees that Sansa looks more and more like Catelyn. So he's almost using the daughter as a substitute in his infatuation, because I think love is probably the wrong word. Infatuation. He transfers it over to Sansa. So that's the first half of it. The second half of it is he just wants power. He wants to sit on the Iron Throne. And it's not just because he wants to do anything with it in particular. It's because he was belittled all his life. And so he's got this inferiority complex deep inside him, as lots of people who get belittled and bullied do. And he is wanting to always prove to himself and then to everyone else that he is cleverer than them, that he can actually go off and climb to great heights. So those are the drivers of Littlefinger. That's what he's been trying to do all this time. And so I think it was this moment of glaring honesty when he says everything I'm doing is to do with this picture of me on the Iron Throne and you beside me, Sansa. So that's what his drive has been. So hopefully that puts us roughly on the same page with the Littlefinger. I've got a few questions here, but I'll just have a quick flick through the chat just to see what's going on here. Graphics by Kathy says having some glitches in the stream. Guys, if anyone else is, then just let me know and I'll see whether I can change something, but otherwise it might be at your end. Let's see what's Robert Gary, £5, no fake money. Excellent. Real money, real. I know what £5 is. So how do you think Littlefinger will die in the books? Amazing videos too. Thank you so much. That's very kind. Okay, so how I think he will die in the books is I don't know the exact mechanism. Because I don't think that we can know just yet. But what I am sure of is the fact that this is going to be a combination of Sansa bringing it around, because she has started to see that she knew this from very early on, but she's started to see in the books quite how duplicitous he is, quite how many lies he's been building up, and in particular, quite how he has been working against her family. And I think once she reaches what she considers to be a position of safety for her, then she will be able to make a move. Now, when I say a position of safety for her, was she couldn't, on the show, she was always at the mercy of Littlefinger right up until the time when she got up to Winterfell. And it was only when she got up to Winterfell that she could truly reach that point where she felt safe in and of herself, that she could then reveal the truth about what Littlefinger had been doing. So that's the mechanism through which it's going to happen. I think it will be one of these kind of ironic deaths, in that I think that it will be all his lies will come back to bite him. I think that there are now so many characters. I don't know whether it will be Bran again, who will be sort of discovering things and saying things about his past. I suspect it will be Sansa more than anything else, who will be the person who will reveal what he's been doing. She could do it in the Eyrie, but I think pushing him out of the moon door would be quite a poetic way to do it. But I don't personally think she's yet got to the strength there to do that. Not just the physical strength, but I think that she doesn't have the allies there. People don't even know who she is there. She's still in the books. She's still there in disguise. So I think that what we've seen under the radar and perhaps a little bit on the radar in the books, in the pre-release chapters of the Winds of Winter, is that Littlefinger's game is to be stockpiling food because he knows the winter's coming. And he's willing to pay out a lot of money to get all of this food in. And then when others are starting to get hungry, they will pay anything in order to buy the food off of him. And that's how he thinks he's going to get his power. So that is his game going on there. But I think that what will eventually happen is that he will want to make this move on the north. It won't be the exact same way that it happened on the show, but I think we will end up seeing him and Sansa head up north in order to make her claim to the north. And I think it is there, once she's got in there, once Jon is there, once we've got the other returning Starks, and I think they will return as well, I think that's the point at which it will happen. It may not be the exact same way. In fact, I'd be surprised if it's the exact same way, but I think that's roughly the way that will happen. Okay, so I've got a question from Danielle Marston, who I did see there in the chat earlier. Hi, Danielle, if you're still there. One of my newer Patreons, so welcome. Saying, do you think that the death of Littlefinger signifies the death of political villainy? So from this point on, it really isn't about the throne anymore. P.S. I'm really going to miss Littlefinger, one of my favorite villains ever. I also miss him on the show, and I will miss him in the books when he goes. Do I think that the death of Littlefinger signifies the death of political villainy? I don't think so, but I don't think that villainy is quite the word that George R.R. Martin would use. I think that Littlefinger is one of the most selfish people on the show, and I think that quite across the piece, there are a lot of people we might think of as selfish, but Littlefinger, everything is about what he wants. And I think that that is going to be part of his undoing. When he goes, is this going to be the end of political villainy? Are people not going to want the Iron Throne anymore? No, I don't think so. People will always be people, and I think people will always want as much power as possible. I think the question is whether somebody is strong enough to actually, to use Daenerys' words, break the wheel, to get rid of the Iron Throne completely so that there's a new way of doing things. And so I think that's where we might end up, rather than Littlefinger being the end of a political, what did you call it, political villainy. I think that in terms of sort of this self-centered focus on trying to gain power, then yes, he will leave a huge vacuum there. But there are others. We looked at Varys a moment ago. He's not entirely altruistic. He's doing things because he thinks he's best. And there are others as well. You could look at someone like Yara Asher in the books, who comes across very well, but she feels very entitled, and I think that she thinks that she should have the Salt Throne, and I think it's the sense of entitlement which is the thing that is going to be challenged. I think there are a lot of people who feel entitled to something. Littlefinger sort of felt entitled because he felt he ought to go and prove himself. But I think all of these people who inherit thrones simply because who they were when they were born, I think they will be the people who will be struggling against any change in political order. Tuck Joe, super chat. Thank you so very much. Hi, Robert. Sansa says to Littlefinger, "Thanks for your many lessons. Do you think that she will be able to use those skills in season 8?" Yeah, I think so. I think she was already starting to use them. I think we saw a sort of a nod to this Littlefinger idea about the gathering in the grain when she was running Winterfell in season 7, when she was talking about food stockpiles and the like. So I think she's been learning. But I think without if you exclude the people around Team Dany, people like Tyrion and Varys, up north they don't have that many people who actually understand how things work in King's Landing, and specifically how Cersei works. And I think that her main role is going to be to actually point out, you know what, you might all have turned your backs on Cersei, but that doesn't mean that she's suddenly given up and stopped and all the rest of it. She's going to be doing stuff, and so she's going to be the person who's one step ahead. Now, it should be Tyrion. If we take his book character, he should also be one step ahead. But I think we will definitely see that with Sansa. Her role, I think, in season 8 is not obviously going to be the person on the front line of any battle. So the fighting is going to be happening with Jon. It's going to be happening with Daenerys, and it's going to be happening with Jaime and Bronn and people like that. They're going to go off and do all the fighting. Somebody has to be the person who actually rules, and that she is going to be left in that role. I think Jon is going to largely say that he will come back, but he will largely say, leaving aside for 1 second this idea about how his parentage will come out, he will say, you have to carry on doing this because we're going to be going off and doing the fighting. But she will have a massive issue of how to bring people together when we get, firstly, Daenerys arrive, because Jon went down south and all of the Northern Lords and the Lords of the Vale were very suspicious about the idea of him teaming up with a Targaryen, and then she's going to arrive up there with 2 dragons and a huge horde of Dothraki and some Unsullied, and it's going to look like an invasion force. So she will have a huge battle to try and keep them on side, and then she's going to have a huge issue with Jon if it suddenly turns out that he probably isn't actually the eldest true Stark there. He's actually a Targaryen heir, so perhaps he should be the king in King's Landing rather than the Lord of Winterfell. So there'll be a lot of issues for her to do there to deal with the internal politics of the North. So I think that's where her skills and what she's learned from Littlefinger will come in useful. But it's partly about that actually how to manage, and partly about understanding what other people are doing and why they're doing it. So really good question. I'm actually really looking forward to Sansa next season. I know that there are a lot of people the first few seasons that I shared everyone's frustration with Sansa in the first few seasons. She really was not the most dynamic of characters, let's put it that way. But she has grown. She has grown a lot, and she has learned a lot. And she said herself, I might be quite a slow learner, but I have learned. And I think we're going to see her come all full circle and actually end up being this very strong ruler at the end of it. Okay, so Jeff Burst, just quickly, hi, welcome, good to see you there in the chat, asking where these are posted ahead of time. Jeff, I try and post them. This one was a slightly late decision. I'll try and give a bit more notice. I post these on Patreon when I set them up, and I post these on Facebook, and I post these on Twitter. And if you're a subscriber and you've got your notifications switched on, you may need to go in and have a look at your notifications. Just generally, people, if you're not getting notifications, then it should flash up as a notification when I'm live streaming. But if you want to know what I'm doing and when I'm coming on live, then if do as I say, if you're a patron, then check out the Patreon page. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I am in Deep Geek on Twitter. If you want to follow me on Facebook, I'm in Deep Geek on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, incidentally, as in Deep Geek Official. So that's more for sort of pictures and things like that, obviously, rather than announcements. But yeah, I try and let people know in as many different places as possible. Okay, so let's have a quick flick through. Fraulein Winter, good to see you as well. Another one of my patrons. I love Sansa. I'm grown to kind of like her myself. I think she's really grown as a character. Okay, so we've got a few. Just to pick up on the last couple of questions, Forrest Blurter asked, will Littlefinger die in the same way in the books as he did in the show? I think I covered that one already, but I haven't seen you in the chat, but if you're there, then do shout if I haven't. And I think that's all my questions there from that I got beforehand. So guys, Forrest Butter, I did answer that one already. So guys, if you've got any more questions, do quickly do them. Jack Flash says, if Jon and Sansa make it to the end, do you think they will end up together? No, I don't think so. I think I did a video on this quite a while ago, actually. I know why people think that might be the case, but I think Sansa will either end up on her own, or if she is going to end up with a person, I think the person she's most likely to end up with, I think, is Tyrion. Incidentally, I think that Sansa is the person with the greatest number of possible partners that come up across the piece with theories about who she might end up with. I don't actually see many that saying, you know what, hey, she's had quite bad experiences so far, maybe she wants to stick by herself for a bit. I think that's quite a strong option, that, you know, if you think about who she has been married to in the past, she might have been put off marriage. Let's just put it lightly. I think the only person that, when she looks back over her life, she will that she was romantically attached to in any way, who treated her right, was Tyrion. And I think that she will realize that. And I think that we saw it a couple of times in the books, I think on the show as well, where she does think back and go, actually, you know, he wasn't all that bad. He did actually treat me with respect. So if there's anyone that she ends up with, I think it's going to be Tyrion. Also, incidentally, because of the original idea of this reflecting in some way the Wars of the Roses. And for those who aren't aware of that bit of history, how that, long story short and hugely simplified, but how that ended was when you had these two families of the Yorks against the Lancasters, the Yorks being Starks, the Lancasters being the Lannisters, and how that ended was when the heir to both of those two families married, the heirs to both those two families married, and it would make sense if the Stark and Lannister heirs married at the end of it. And I think the two who are most likely to be survived and marriageable, if that's a word, are going to be Sansa and Tyrion, particularly given their past. But I wonder whether or not she might just say, no, I'm not going to marry anyone. I don't think Jon is going to end up with her. I think that he had his one love interest early on with Rose, and I think that his love interest is going to be with Daenerys. And I think on the show that's going to take up almost all of this season. The ups and downs. I don't think it's going to be a pure love story, but that relationship, I think, will take it out, and I don't think there'll be time for him to start something new. Jeff Burst asks, if you haven't already covered this, who do you think the final small people, a la the end of the Lord of the Rings, will be who rebuild? Who do you think will have the most input on this epilogue? So for those who aren't aware of the analogy here, thanks, Jeff. That's a really good question. I think when we talk about the ending of Game of Thrones, we always talk about this word bittersweet. And that's overused, and we're always saying, well, is this ending bittersweet? Is that ending bittersweet? But actually, when you look at what George R.R. Martin has said, the thing he said that I think is more interesting in terms of the feel for the ending of the show is he says, if you read the penultimate chapter of The Lord of the Rings, which is called The Scouring of the Shire, that's the feel that I want to try and achieve with the ending of A Song of Ice and Fire. So the feeling that's there from that chapter is the feeling that I want to engender in the ending of my stories. Now, the Scouring of the Shire, it's not actually in the films. They cut it out because Tolkien had lots of endings in the way we view it. They were all entirely justified, but there are a number of different places you could have cut off the story, and they just took one out for reasons of brevity, because they were kind of long films already. But The Scouring of the Shire is basically when the four hobbits go back to the Shire. All the battles have been won. The ring is destroyed. Sauron is vanquished. Aragorn is returned to sit on the throne. All is well with the world, but they head back home and they find actually not all of the villains have been rooted out. In fact, some have taken over the Shire, and this wonderful homeland that they once had, that they were looking forward to returning to, is actually ruined. So they use the skills that they've gained during their adventures, and they force out the final villains, the sort of the sub-villains, as it were. And then they just set to rebuilding the Shire, trying to make it can never be exactly the same. It can never be the thing that they originally were fighting for, but they're trying to build something new that has a lot of the essence of the old, but is a new thing. So that's the feeling that George R.R. Martin says that he wants for the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. And so Jeffrey's asking, who do you think the final small people at the end of the Lord of the Rings who rebuild will be? Now, my view, and I did a video on this, I think 3 or 4 months ago, called something like How Will It All End? If you want to go and check this out. My view is that this is the cripples, bastards, and broken things. This is where this quote comes into its own. I think we will see that the old order of people, one thing we did cover earlier in this live stream was that all of the original members of the small council, other than Varys, are already dead. All of the original heads of the houses at the beginning of the stories are all dead. So there is a completely new load of people. But the people who will survive, I think, not uniquely, but the people who will survive to build the new world are these cripples, bastards, and broken things. The people who have been broken and have rebuilt themselves. And so we're talking about people like Theon. We're talking about people like Sandor. We're talking people like Tyrion and Sam, the people who have been badly affected by what's happened, but have struggled through, and we're now rooting for them. I think those are the people who are going to be rebuilding this new world. You can actually add Sansa in that, as we were talking about her a moment ago, because Sansa is a person who has undoubtedly been ill-treated by the world that was there. She has been used. If we just take a step back and for a moment, we talk about her being this quite passive character, this not a great protagonist. But the reason why is that that's what she was told she had to be. She was effectively sold off to be the wife of somebody that she'd never met. She was sent hundreds of miles away from her home in order to be the wife to somebody for a political reason. And it turned out that somebody was horrible to her, terrible to her, and she actually couldn't do anything about it because that was the system she was in. Similarly, when she was then married in across to Tyrion, and this was obviously she was never actually married to Joffrey, but she was married to Tyrion against her wishes. because she was a political pawn. And so, although that didn't turn out too badly, again, that's not what she was wanted. That was the system beating her down. What happened on the show with Ramsay was the system beating her down. She was used by Littlefinger as a pawn in that. So she is also, I think, one of these cripples, bastards, and broken things who has been broken by the system and had to build her way back up. And that is why I think we're liking Sansa's arc a lot more now, is because she's come through and she's now taking control of it, rather than just being beaten by this oppressive and patriarchal system that was there, that said that the daughters of the nobles had to go off and do whatever their fathers said. So I hope that one answers that one for you. Let's have a quick look. In the books, Barristan is still alive from the small council. Yes. That's a fair point. I don't think Barristan will survive in the books. I don't think he'll die in the same way, but I don't think he will survive in the books. I think that his role will be taken over when as a sort of the leader of what's going on. I think that he was there in a literary way as a bridge until Tyrion arrives to take over as the right-hand person of Daenerys. So yes, you're right. Barristan is still alive in the books. Let's have a quick look through. Aid Austin says the end of Lord of the Rings is utter tedium. Well, I like it, but I think more crucially to this, George R.R. Martin loves it. And he it's not that he's saying that he wants to have lots of different endings quite drawn out. What he's saying is he's wanting that feeling. And when you actually see what he says about the Scouring of the Shire, he says each time he comes back to it, he loves it even more. He thinks it's a brilliant piece of writing. I think the actual word he used was brilliant. So sorry if you didn't like it, but George R. R. Martin did. So I think if we're trying to understand how this story ends, we have to look to see what happened there, because that's what he said is going on. And we seem to be going on to a bit of a Tolkien thing here. Misty306, Amazon is advertising what 5 seasons of the Silmarillion. We don't know yet exactly what they're going to be doing. They've bought the rights to the Lord of the Rings world, to Middle Earth, effectively. They have effectively committed to 5 seasons. But we've had very little information yet about what that is. It's not going to be a remake of Lord of the Rings. It's not going to be a remake of The Hobbit. So I'm actually quite pleased about that. But it's going to be something that they pull from the history. Now, that may be in the Silmarillion. That may be something that they do based on what we know of what happened just before the Lord of the Rings, perhaps where the travels of Aragorn or Gandalf or something like that. But the short answer is we don't know exactly what it is. It's going to be set in that world, but they haven't told us the details of what it's going to be. Okay, guys, I think looks like we're moving on to other things now. Tom Bombadil, Michael Palmer. Yeah, Tom Bombadil was also cut from the movies for I would say for good reasons. I love Tom Bombadil. If you've never read the books, then you've no idea what I'm talking about right now. He's a really great character, but he doesn't advance the plot huge amounts. Let's put it that way. Okay, so guys, I'm going to quickly do a bit of rounding up now, but if you've got any more questions about Littlefinger, then drop them in now, because I'll just do a few thoughts before we sort of end there. Talamas Kadan is talking actually Aragorn versus Jon. Discuss. Yes, there's a lot of Aragorn in Jon. and I think Azora Hype has probably left the chat now. This is a discussion that he and I have quite a lot about the hero's journey and Jon, because and I think this is quite an interesting insight. We're moving away from Littlefinger, but hey, it's one of my favorite topics, so let's get to it. Jon is in many ways set up by George R.R. Martin as the archetypal fantasy hero. He is like every other kind of, if you've read the same kind of great and trashy fantasy novels that I have, you know, the kind of the high fantasy ones, then you will know what the archetypal fantasy hero is. This is an orphan boy, almost always is a boy rather than a girl, but an orphan boy who grows up in a castle somewhere, not realizing that secretly his parents are royalty. And so actually secretly he's the heir to the kingdom. And not only that, but he's also a child of prophecy. He doesn't realize this, but there are prophecies about a chosen one, a prince who was promised, if you like, who is going to save humanity from this great evil that's going to invade the land. And over time, he then sort of turns into this great hero who gets this great sword. He gets these great bunch of companions around him, and then eventually, near the end of the story, it is revealed that he is indeed this great child of prophecy who's going to save the world, and he's the king in waiting. And at the end of it, he destroys the bad guys and becomes the king. That is the plot of huge amounts of very trashy fantasy novels, and it's quite similar to the Aegon story. The Aegon story has some tweaks on that, but that's the same kind of idea. My feeling, and a lot of people are saying Jon is Harry Potter. Yes, this comes up a lot of the places. This orphan child of prophecy, etc., who faces off against the bad guy. This is an archetype for a reason, because it makes a good story. But George R.R. Martin, to my mind, has set this up exactly like that, so that he can get it to that final point, and then say, you know what, I'm not going to go down that route. He said many times that he doesn't like all these archetypes. He doesn't like all these kind of bits of quite lazy storytelling that just allow us to join up the dots. So I think that whereas Jon is set up as this kind of Aragorn type, the heir who's going to grow up to become the king, I don't think that's where it's going to end. I don't think that's where the story arc is going to go, because I think George R.R. Martin is setting us up to believe that, and then he's going to sweep the rug out from under our feet. That's just a personal view, and I know others have the opposite view. And as I say, I've had this conversation with Azora Hype a number of times. Lots of great chat there. Harry and Neville were chosen. Yes, absolutely, Sonia McLeod. I believe that completely. But we are digressing quite a long way away from where we started here. But yes, Neville could also have been the boy that was promised. Okay, guys, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing this to a close now. As I say, if there's any final comments, then do put them in there. I just want to give you a reminder of the things I said a while ago, stuff that's coming up, because in case you missed it, I am going to be, for everyone on my channel, I'll come on to patrons in just a second. For everyone, I'm going to be doing Westworld. I'm going to be focusing a lot of attention on Westworld. When season 2 starts, which is at the end of this month, I'm going to be doing at least one live stream every week, breaking down the episodes, as well as a full breakdown of each, an explanation of each episode just after it comes out. There might be a bit more content to that as well. I'll probably do at least one other thing, picking up the main issues there each week. But I'm also going to keep up with the Game of Thrones, so I'm going to be doing these Game of Thrones live streams also on a weekly basis, so we don't miss out on the Game of Thrones stuff. And the Traveller's Guide is going to carry on every Friday. I really enjoy doing the Traveller's Guide, and I know a lot of you guys enjoy them as well. So that's definitely going to be carrying on, and I'll throw in a few Game of Thrones theory videos as well, just to keep us going. For my patrons, a couple of quick things I wanted to say. Firstly, thank you as always. If you want to keep an eye out, in about a week's time, there's going to be the next of my audio narrations from the Winds of Winter pre-release chapters. This time it's going to be Tyrion, so keep an eye out there. If you're a patron, that's going to be coming up. And also a chance for my patrons to be voting, my $10 patrons to be voting on a future video that I do. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, guys, thank you very much. There's been some great chat going on there. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great seeing so many people there. If you keep an eye out, I've got my Blood Raven videos coming out tomorrow, and then there's going to be a lot more content coming out over the next couple of weeks. So, guys, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon. Take care.